Hi, my dearest family. Today, let's talk about living on Saturn line, and I would like to share my experience when I was on Saturn line. So, living on Saturn line in astrocartography is often described as kind of like a boot camp for the soul, while surely it is not the most relaxing placement, but I think it's arguably one of the most transformative energy to build a lasting legacy. So, regardless of the specific line, Saturn brings kind of like a get to work energy to it. So it often feels super heavy or serious. You might find yourself taking on more responsibilities than usual. It's a bit of a slow burn, really. So success rarely comes overnight here. It requires persistence, but the rewards earned on a Saturn line are usually very permanent, though. Many people actually report feeling more introverted, isolated, physically and emotionally as well, which often leads to kind of like a deep self-discovery or accomplishment of a major project. So this line is actually super good if you would like to work behind the scene. Remember that Saturn has got planetary joy in the 12th house, so often it requires to go within. Now, of course, there could be Saturn on the Ascendant or Saturn on the Midheaven line as well. So if it's on the Ascendant, often it's about self-discipline. You are kind of like forced to mature and redefine who you are. Maybe you just want to move there, for example, and find yourself starting a rigorous fitness routine or a demanding solo career. Saturn is about thick skin. So surely when Saturn is hitting on your AC, then the thick skin is going to come with it. Now, if Saturn is on the midheaven line, then that's going to be affecting your career reputation. So it's actually brilliant for professional status, but at the cost of high pressure or a lot of hard work as well. Maybe you land a prestigious job with a strict boss. Maybe you have to be working 60 hours a week, but you become that authority in your field somehow. Now, Saturn can be even on your descendant line as well. So that might be bringing, so it means that it somehow triggers your AC and the descendant as well at the same time. So that's a relationship reality. The relationship can become a lot more serious, a lot more traditional, but restrictive at the same time. So you might marry someone older or someone more established, or you find that you only attract people who require work and commitment. And if Saturn triggers your midheaven line, it means it triggers your IC as well, which is talking to us about foundational roots. So there could be a lot more focus on the home, real estate, the heritage, having to balance out work and life at the same time. And maybe you buy kind of like a house that needs to be fixed up and it takes years to renovate, or you move back to your hometown to care for an elderly relative, for example. So each line carry each line carries pros and cons, and I would like you to understand that. While many people fear Saturn, it does provide a structure that other lines, for example, Neptune or Jupiter, often would lack, actually. But the challenges that come with Saturn is fatigue. Saturn rules bones and joints. The weight can feel super physical as well. It can bring a lot of delays, paperwork, approvals, maybe a milestones that require twice as long as expected. And you can get a lot of no's as well. So you may face more boundaries and closed doors initially. But once we have got that breakthrough, it should be giving you a lot of yes as well at the same time. The benefits of Saturn is mastery. So you leave that line with a skill or achievement that no one can take away from you. It might even bring you financial stability. It's not an easy money, I would like to emphasize on that. It promotes long-term saving and resource management as well. And you can also walk away with a lot of clarity because Saturn is going to strip away the superficial. leaving you with only what is essential and true. I think the secret to surviving a Saturn line is to lean into that restriction, really. So if you try to take the shortcuts or avoid work, that line is going to feel very oppressive. But if you show up early, work hard, and follow the rules in a way, Saturn eventually rewards you with a position of respect and stability as well. By the way, I'm going to be making a 16-week course on relocation. This course is not only going to talk to you about the lines, because the lines are just really one segment of a relocation reading. So I'm going to be teaching you 6 techniques. And during the 16-week period, you should gain enough confidence to be able to read astrocartography and other relocation techniques, such as local space, geodetic planets, parens, and so forth, to determine the best possible line. Often I see on social media and Facebook groups and stuff like that, the people are only focusing on these planetary lines. Oh, I live on a Saturn line. What's the benefit? What's the challenge of that? But it's just really kind of like 15% of the entire relocation reading. So if you would like to join that class, I highly recommend with Uranus moving into the sign of Gemini, it feels like a relocation topic is going to become even bigger than ever before. But I lived in, well, I was in on Saturn line for about, it was a Saturn Mars crossover for 2 months in Thailand. And I specifically went to that place because I wanted to do a fitness boot camp. So we were doing 4 or 5 exercises each day. Food was super boring. I felt tired all the time, but I had a vision. I have natal Saturn in the ninth house in the sign of Scorpio. And Saturn is tightly entwined to my rising sign. So my vision was weight loss. Yes, my expectations were not met, as I didn't lose as much as I hoped. I'm a strong Sagittarius person, so I expected a lot more than I received, but I got a lot stronger for sure. So, living on a Saturn Mars crossover, what I have just described to you is a textbook manifestation of that Saturn Mars crossover. When you combine the planet of restriction, Saturn, with the planet of physical effort, which is Mars, then you essentially get this Sisyphus effect, repeated, grueling effort that feels like pushing, a boulder up a hill placement. So in astrocartography, a crossover blends two energies. Mars wants to go fast and burn energy, while Saturn wants to slow down and build structure. So Saturn turns Mars' impulsive energy into kind of like a boring routine. And this is why it felt like a loop of 4 or 5 exercises a day rather than an exciting athletic adventure. Mars is pretty much your physical fuel, and Saturn is like a brake. So living on this line often feels like driving with emergency brake on. And you are working twice as hard to move half as far, and I think it explains the constant exhaustion that I went through around that time. Now, natal Saturn is in the ninth house in the sign of Scorpio. So ninth house represents vision, and Saturn is the planet of reality. Ninth house rules long distance travel and the vision or that bigger picture. So I traveled there to be able to get my body in shape. So having Saturn there natally means uh, my approach or I approach travel with a goal or a lesson in mind. I didn't go on a vacation. I went there for transformation, which is the scorpionic part of things. And then when we start thinking about my weight loss outcome, Saturn in Scorpio is incredibly stubborn. It focuses on density, the bone mass, rather than lightness. And maybe I didn't see the scale drop as much as I would have liked to, but the fact that I got stronger just clearly shows that I was building, that Saturnian density. I did feel isolated there, so Saturn often shrinks the social parameters. Imagine Saturn as the wall. So living in a small town, Saturn acts as a barrier. It forces you inward because there are no external distractions, really. While it felt boring, the lack of much to do is exactly what allowed me to sustain 4 or 5 workouts a day. On a Jupiter or Venus line, uh, I likely would have been distracted by, invitations or good food and all those type of stuff. Now, also I would like to mention that around that time Mars was transiting my Saturn Mars crossover as well. So I had an injury. Unfortunately, I broke my knee. So I had to finish the retreat earlier than I expected. And this is what I've mentioned in my previous video I made a couple of days ago about relocation as well. There are places which are super good for you to live, but not always and not um, kind of like immediately. So that's important to mention there as well. So maybe imagine that you have got a Jupiter-Venus crossover happening in Amsterdam and you would like to live there. But what if we have got transiting Saturn or transiting Pluto running through that part of the world as well, which you must look at when you are considering relocation. And by the way, this technique is super good also to look at what exactly going to be happening to you. Now, I was very aware that I was going to a Saturn Mars crossover, but I did not check that Mars was also going to be transiting at that point. And on the day when the transit got exact, this is when I managed to break my knee. Mars rules sharp objects, heat, sudden accidents, while Saturn rules the bones, joints, the structure of the body. So it was a shock breaking my knee, unfortunately. So, the combination of that Mars, which is the force and the speed, hitting Saturn, which is the resistance and the bone, is kind of like a very classic signature for fracture or a break. So think of it as a moving object, Mars, hitting a stationary wall, and that's Saturn. So Saturn traditionally rules the knees. A Mars transit crossing a Saturn line frequently manifests as break in the structure or even in the skeletal system. So I was in a fitness boot camp, and actually, when I fell down, I was doing Thai kickboxing, and then somehow I tried to kick the bag, with an advanced movements and it didn't go well, so I fell on my knee. So this is a very typical Mars and Saturn type of combination. And I also believe that the over exertion was in the picture as well, because I was pushing myself through my physical limits, really. And on a Saturn line, the limit is a hard ceiling, really. So if Mars tries to push through a Saturnian boundary, something usually has to give, in this case, the bone. And yeah, so that's what exactly happened here. With my natal Saturn being in the ninth house in the sign of Scorpio, Scorpio is intensity. It's not a light energy. It often involves crisis as a precursor to transformation. So actually breaking a bone can be a very Scorpionic way to force a total stop yeah. The ninth house is the house of lessons. It's a house of belief system, the higher learning. So this injury likely forced me to shift my philosophy on health. And how it forced me is that I went back to Turkey. At the time, I lived in Turkey. And then I figured out that I wanted to do a month retreat regarding Ayurveda. And how this break basically kind of reshaped my belief system is that we don't have to do sport 4 or 5 times a day in order for you to lose weight. Because I didn't do anything at the retreat. at the Ayurveda retreat. I was eating five, six times a day, I believe. Six times a day. I was going for two treatments a day. It was certain type of massage treatments and so forth. And I lost 13 kilos in 1 month. And on that fitness boot camp, I lost only 9 kilos on top of my head with all that exercise. So I was a little bit disappointed. So what I learned is that food is actually more important than the sport itself. So I went there again. I was a little bit isolated. I don't remember what line I was on in India doing that retreat, but I was isolated surely. So that's a bit of an aftermath of that Saturn line break, I believe. But I think there is a silver lining in everything. So the silver lining of that Saturnian injury is that even though the healing was a bit slow, but I hope that the bone grow back stronger at that break point on one hand. And secondly, I managed to figure out, I learned a lesson that food is actually better. And I also had to learn that there is no shortcuts. I have to be putting in the work, consistently, basically. So that's my experience on Saturn line. So I would like to hear your experience. Have you been on a Saturn line before? Have you lived there? The other thing that I would have spoken about in my previous video as well, but some people pick up the energies a lot quicker and some are a lot slower. So if you are more of a cardinal person, usually you might pick up the energy within 1 to 3 months. If you are a mutable person, potentially 3 to 6 months. If you're a fixed person, it can take up to 2 years to pick up the energy of the place. So this is one of the reasons why I don't necessarily want to be looking at, "Ooh, if I travel here on my upcoming birthday, am I going to be changing my life forever?" Because some people pick up the energy a lot quicker and some wouldn't. But let me hear your experiences on Saturn line. How was it for you? And also do let me know in the chat box below if you are interested in more of my experiences on certain lines, because trust me, I've tried quite a few of them before. I've tried my Venus line and I can tell you a lot about that. Maybe I'm going to be making a video on that too. Venus is super strong in my chart, but it's not as good. It wasn't as good experience as many would think. So maybe I will be back with that video. Thank you very much, and I hope to see you in my next video. Oh, don't forget to like, subscribe, and all those lovely things so that the channel can grow and then I can make further free of charge contents for you. Have a blessed week. Take care. Bye-bye.